Hello, Eva. I'm very happy to see you today. Eva Haug from the University of Applied Sciences in Amsterdam. And we're going to talk today about collaborative online international learning, or COIL, which is part of internationalization at home, but not all there is to it. So thank you very much for agreeing to chat today.
Lovely to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation.
So perhaps you could explain, first of all, how you got interested in COIL programs, Eva.
Yes, we had been doing internationalization at home where our students collaborated with students abroad. We would do short trips, and then the students, upon returning, would work at a distance, which basically is like virtual exchange. But I didn't know that the term COIL existed yet. But then there was a partner in a country I wanted to work with, but we couldn't visit. And after I was told, well, then you can't work with them, I thought, I'm sure that's not the answer. So I heard about I went somewhere where I saw a presentation by John Rubin from the SUNY COIL Center, who was then the CEO of the COIL Center. And I thought that's the answer, actually, because then the whole thing would be at a distance. In the program that I was working, internationalization was still connected to some mobility, so not necessarily exchange, but short mobility. And I wanted to disconnect that because I also thought it was very important that students realize that the world is bigger than Europe. Our international projects were very Eurocentric, and I thought it was time that we disconnected from the need to be able to travel and really engage with in collaboration with other types of universities. That's how it got started, really.
So which country was that very first initiative with?
The first one was Finland, still Europe, but very expensive to travel to.
Yes.
So, and I wanted to work with Finland because of their educational system and because their teaching was so innovative. So I really wanted to do something with that university. And then the second one was the US and then Brazil. So after that, I immediately went outside of Europe.
Yeah. Now, of course, then when it's in different parts of the world, then you get time differences and issues like that. So there's a question of dealing with it synchronously or asynchronously, either online at the same time or else somehow managing the systems. You've used both, have you?
Yes, all core projects always involve some synchronous and some asynchronous work. I think the majority of the work that is done, actually, I think it's very important first to explain, a COIL project is not necessarily done within the sort of the restrictions of your classroom. So you teach a certain module, you're involved in a program and you teach a course or a module, and part of the project work, part of the student work is done outside the classroom anyway. There's readings that students need to do, they need to work on deliverables, but instead of just doing some reading or just writing a paper themselves, they do that in collaboration with other students. So a lot of the work takes place outside your contact hours with the students. So within the contact hours of your students, sometimes you do arrange for some synchronous moments. Basically, usually what we do is a sort of a festive kickoff moment, like, oh, we're really going to be working with students in Mexico, and here they are, this is what they look like, this is what they sound like, to get the first sort of anxiety out of the way. And sometimes we try to wrap up as well, to do some sort of reflection or some lessons learned together, and to have a closing moment, to really feel some closure of the project when possible, if time difference allows. Sometimes when it's more than 6 or 7 hours, it's challenging. So then, then we sometimes focus the majority of the work on asynchronous work, but we do encourage that the students outside our contact hours engage at least once a week synchronously with their peers somewhere in the world.
Does it work better than, do you think, if it's individuals making contact or if it's groups talking to groups in the other country? Which do they both work, or is there one that's better?
Yes, they both work, but I find so it's easier maybe to schedule an appointment to do a Zoom like we're doing if it's individuals, but it's very scary for students to do this alone because there's so many different elements of this type of work that they need to manage. It's the technology is sometimes the least of it because they can be quite familiar, but using the technology in a professional manner, managing a timeline like that, a project management, so overseeing all that needs to be done, working with someone you don't know. So there's so many elements. And then for Dutch students, the language, because we teach in Dutch. So any COIL project is always done using a second language, which would be English in most cases. So with all those moving parts, at least when there's two of them, they feel as slightly more secure. There's always also the element of sort of risk management. If I make very small student teams and a student on my end decides that they don't want to do it anymore, the harm on the side of my partner is actually tremendous, because then there's a student that loses the project, the possibility to finish the project. So with two pairs or pairs of 2 or 3, I do recommend that the teams are very small.
Okay, and then you've got all the group work issues, which we won't go into at this point because that affects many different types of group work. But you mentioned technology there, which I think is another thing that people have concerns about. And obviously, access to technology is different in different parts of the world and subject to individual differences and so on as well. I think you've said that technology is not always the most important factor here. So how do you get around that?
Well, we don't get around it because you cannot do a COIL project without technology, obviously, because the communication, the teamwork, it all takes place in the sort of the third space. So using online digital tools. So obviously technology is a part of it, but I will say, so the technology follows the pedagogy. It starts with design, really thinking about your learning outcomes. What do you want the students to do? What kind of engagement or what kind of activities do they need to do? And then you find the tools that suit that, as opposed to thinking, let's use Zoom and then design the project around Zoom. That makes no sense. Now you do, there is a lot of technology, and the person that invents the one app or tool that does everything from partnering to storing documents, working on documents, video chat, such a tool doesn't exist. But if someone invents it, they will be very rich, I'm sure. So basically what it means is managing a learning management system in your university. That's where the first issues start because of the GDPR. We cannot always add our students to another learning management system because of the information that they sometimes need to add your students. So sometimes those are separate, and sometimes you create a third space, so a different digital environment where students can go to find the assignment, for example, where they can upload their products, still safeguarding their privacy. That's the formal aspect, but then there's collaborative tools and there's communication tools, and then there's chatting. But I find video conferencing so extremely important, where you can see, you get so much more information, like the kind of weather it is, all those things. And especially because intercultural learning is such an intrinsic and important part of COIL work, I think visual aids are very important. So I always encourage a variety of tools.
So you mentioned intercultural learning there. Obviously that can happen in any discipline. It's not a question of being restricted to specific topics, but I think the people seem to think it can only be about very sort of social type issues, but I think that's not the case. And you've mentioned a project in Mexico that you were involved with.
Yes, that was a project that had to do with safety. We worked with Tecnológico Monterrey, and they have different campuses. This campus was in Chihuahua, which is close to the border with the US, and their main issue there or concern is narco trafficking and all the crime that's associated with narco trafficking. And the same time here in Europe, it was the time of the bombings, the terrorist attacks in Brussels and in Paris. So we designed a project where students looked at, so students in Chihuahua and students in Amsterdam looked at the hard facts of crime and violence and safety, and the soft facts. So the soft facts were more cultural, for example, that in Mexico, a more group-focused country, they find safety in groups, whereas in the Netherlands, more individualistic, they find groups sometimes a little bit suspicious. So they find individuals more trustworthy. It's also, how do you look at police? Is police someone you would go to or someone you would actually walk away from? Is police to be trusted? And so those are more soft facts or soft factors around safety, and they are often also culturally related. There's cultural bias involved as well. But also the hard facts, and students compared. They had a discussion about that, and then they created a video. And one of the beautiful outcomes is they both said, I still love my country best. I can see that this is safer in this country and this is actually different there, but I feel at home right where I am. But it was good to learn about how other people perceive, the world around them and their context.
You mentioned outcomes there, and I wonder, is it easy to design learning outcomes for this kind of program?
Well, I think designing learning outcomes, good learning outcomes, is hard.
It's
That's
hard
hard
anyway.
work.
Yeah.
So I can't say that it's easy, but it's doable. I think the challenge is, because designing good learning outcomes, and especially internationalized learning outcomes, is a challenge. And to do so with a partner where you want students on both ends in both courses that are sometimes from different disciplines still feel it makes sense for me to do this. I understand what I'm going to be learning, even though I'm working with someone from a different discipline. That's hard. Yes. You have to find sort of a connection, a hook.
That's a very good point. But going back to the question of technology, you mentioned a program in South Africa,
yes.
and you talked about technology difficulties, partly as a result of the lockdown, because students weren't able to access university facilities anymore. So how have you got around that?
Yeah, so once because of the COVID-19 situation, the university campus closed, students were at home, had very limited students in South Africa and in Amsterdam were at home, but students in South Africa had very limited access to internet, and they had to buy data in order to access internet. So we threw out all the design plans that we had for the project, and we looked at when do they really need to engage with one another, what can they do synchronously, asynchronously. So we wanted them to brainstorm, for example, to collect ideas. So there was we had a digital mind map tool that they could access whenever they had, some time to actually go online, and they could contribute to the mind map that grew every week. And the synchronous moments where we actually asked them to video chat were reserved for coaching and facilitation sessions with the professor, to really talk about the project, the contents of the project, but also the process. So to use those sort of data heavy moments. And we used WhatsApp as a tool, because to send a message on WhatsApp requires very little data usage. So the students did feel like they were part of a team and they were engaged with one another. They could send each other pictures or videos or links to documents, but it didn't require a lot of time online.
Yeah, it's a very important point, isn't it, though, that the thinking about what really does need to be synchronous and what could work in an asynchronous form is really important as part of the whole design process, isn't it? But
absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for talking to me today. I've learned a lot from that as well, and I think it's something that people are getting more and more interested in. So to have somebody with a lot of practical experience it's really good to listen to you. Thank you so much, Eva, and I'm looking forward to seeing you again in person whenever we can at some point.
Hopefully soon.
Hopefully
yes, thank
soon.
you so much.
Thanks again.